was beaten and he was thrown into prison. Why? Because he was preaching the gospel. We can look at Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times. These were men that were used mightily of God, but they all had their failures and their faults. Joseph, we knew, after all he went through, he became the governor of Egypt. And we know of Paul, who he wrote most of the New Testament scriptures that we read today. Peter, who again denied that he knew Jesus 3 times. He cursed, he swore that he didn't know him. Peter, after God restored him, Peter became the greatest preacher of the New Testament, one of the greatest preachers of the New Testament. It is in fact that we can take comfort in knowing that God worked with imperfect people, right? God worked in the midst of our weakness, in the midst of our failure. God has a plan for our lives, and God can manifest his strength through our weaknesses. Amen? The Lord said this to Paul in 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 9. What did God say to Paul? 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 9. So this was after Paul went to God 3 times and asked him, hey God, I have a thorn in my flesh. I have a weakness. He went to him 3 times. Sincere prayer. God, I'm struggling with this thing. I don't know how to function. And it's hampering me. And he went and he talked to God and he prayed and he prayed and he prayed. And verse 9 says, but he said unto me, this is God responding to him, my grace is sufficient for you. And he said, my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. So, here it was that Paul, after he had consulted God about the problem that he had, the Bible didn't tell us what problem he was faced with, or what weakness he had, or what was his situation. It didn't tell us, but whatever it was enough for Paul to go to God 3 times and ask God to take this away, or help me, or deliver me, or whatever his prayer was. And here it was that God responded to Paul. He said, my grace is sufficient for you, and for my power is made perfect in your weakness. So Paul says, therefore, I will boast all the more glad of my weakness. In other words, Paul recognized that God was not able to help him. God was now there to support him. And so Paul said, wow, again, I don't know what his weakness was, but whenever the weakness came upon him, whenever the difficult came upon him, Paul was now rejoicing. Why? Because he knew that God was there to help him. That gave him the strength, amen, to overcome. That gave